Okay, now we got to know Burp generally. So let's start going into details and the various tools and modules in Burp. So let's start with the proxy because that's the basic place where you will see the requests and responses going through your proxy. First, start with the HTTP history part. As you can see, I already have some traffic through my Burp, and in this HTTP history, you see more or less everything what goes through your Burp. In the list, you see the host URL, some interesting data like status, length, stuff like that. But more importantly, if you go here to the bottom, this is the second part of the screen. You can see here first the request. This is the plain request, and in the other tab you see the response. This is the whole plain text response what you got from the server. Now, this way of printing requests and responses is general through the whole tool, so you will see that in other places as well. So for instance, if we come to the request here, there is the row tab which shows the row request. You can look at the headers. That's pretty simple. And actually, if we go to we can generate a request for yourself. So there is the web code. So if you come here to web code / attack, what we did in the setup section, and you go to start. Oh yeah. So if you come here to access control flow and rule-based access control, then you get this form here. Just write something here, and then click on login. That's gonna send the request to the server, which goes through Burp. Then, a pretty neat trick. If you change the ordering of the request here from decreasing, then you can like follow the incoming requests all the time, because always the latest will be on the top. So you will always see as the requests are coming in. It's pretty cool when you're like checking a login flow, and you can just follow which requests are sent in which order. That's pretty cool. Also, when the application does like constant communication with the server, then you will constantly see here what's happening. So that's also pretty neat. But what I wanted to show is here's the post request what we sent when we submitted that form. So now we have another tab here called params, and here you can see all the parameters which were in that request. So we come to, so there were some parameters in the URL, and there was a cookie, and there were some parameters in the body. So you can see all these things here in this comfortable list format. It's nothing special. It's just easier to look at it, especially when you have like lots of parameters, and like here you have like 20 different parameters. It's pretty difficult to see what are they. Then you can just come here and then you will understand. So then there's the headers tab. There's all of the HTTP headers, and there's a hexadecimal view as well, which I don't really use that much. And if you come to the response part, it's more or less the same. You can see the row response, you can see the response headers, you can see an hexa, and there's an HTML view which shows you without the header just the HTML, or if it's an XML, you will see here an XML tab, then you will see the XML file here. And then it's pretty useful, this render tab, that's gonna try to render the HTML for you. As you can see, it doesn't look really good, but what it does is that when you have like huge responses from the row, you have no idea which page was that. Then you can just come to the render, and although it's not loading the CSS, it's not going to execute JavaScript, etc. So it will look bad, but you will be still able to recognize which page that was. So it can be really useful if you just find the request here somewhere, because the request looks interesting, and then you check out the response and you want to see which page was that actually, then you come here to the render, and usually you can recognize which page that was. All right, so that's the request and response. You're gonna look at these things a lot, and yeah, there is a search field here. It's gonna be the same everywhere in Burp, so you can just say test, for instance, and then you will see that test was found once, and it's here. You can use this search field everywhere. It's gonna be very useful. Now, I said that you see all the requests here, what goes through Burp. That's not entirely true because there is a filter here. Usually I don't change that too much. The default filter is pretty good because it filters all the unnecessary things and it lets you focus on the responses and requests which actually have some interesting data in them. Sometimes you need to edit it, like if, as I said, like if there's a constant communication between the server and you just have too many requests and responses, then you can try to create a filter here to filter out those requests, again, to be able to focus only on the important stuff. And now the first tab here, this intercept. So as I said, Burp is an intercepting proxy. That means that we can stop the request before going to the server. So let's actually try that out. I turn the intercept on and I come back here and I will submit this form again, test, and log in. And first you will see that the page is waiting, and Burp says there is something here, and the page is waiting because the request was stopped at the proxy. So this request hasn't gone yet to the server. It's waiting for you to either forward it to the server or drop it. If you drop it, then it's never gonna get to the server. The client will not get any response, so it will time out or something. And the good thing with this is that you can just come here and say that I want to test instead of the password test, and then you click on forward, and we come here and we'll see that it was submitted. And we have another tab here. It says there was an original request which contained the password test, and there was an edited request which contained the password and you will also see here that it was an edited request. It's good when you have lots of requests in the history and then you try to look it up, and then it's going to be easier to find. The good thing with this whole intercepting thing, and there are different use cases when you want to use this. One, for instance, when you're trying out something new, like you try out, you're testing the login mechanism in the application, and you want to see every request which will send during the login, then you come here, you turn on the intercept and start the login procedure, and you will always have to come back here and say forward in every request, but at least you will see exactly what requests were sent. You will also see that in the HTTP history here, but it's better sometimes to look at it on the fly and really look at it and see what's going through. In some other cases, it will be difficult to work with the request in another way, because, for instance, some Java frameworks which generate the UI, so there is it's a single page UI with lots of JavaScript, and only the JavaScript communicates with the server, and sometimes they have serial numbers, so every request is a serial number and the response has the incremented serial number. Then it will be pretty difficult to use the other tools in the Burp suite, because you always have to take care of this serial number. And for me, usually the easiest was to, in such cases, to just use the browser UI and then stop request here in the intercept and edit the request in the intercept here. It will be much slower than using the different automated tools, but sometimes you don't have any other choice. So That's how the intercept works. There is no magic here. It's that simple. And just a quick word about WebSockets. I don't really want to show this here, but what happens is that if the browser is communicating with the web through the WebSocket technology, then you will see that here. That's it. Now let's go into the options. So since this is the proxy part of Burp, you can set up the proxy here. We have already seen this when we set up our whole environment, but let's see quickly the details. So if you come here to the proxy listener and you say edit, then you can change a few things here. Now the proxy is listening on the local host. You can see it here, and it says here loopback only. That means that it listens on the local host. But you can use other interfaces as well. Usually it's not necessary, but in some cases it might be. For instance, you have on your normal machine a licensed burp, and you have to test in a virtual machine because you're testing some rich clients and you need to use it in a virtual machine, and then you cannot install another burp in the virtual machine. Then you can say that you're listening on another interface, and then from the virtual machine you're sending the traffic to that interface, so that you can use burp on another machine than where your client is. Then there's the request handling. Now here you can see you can set up different things. The redirect to host and port means that it doesn't matter where the requests were originally sent. Burp will redirect it to this host and this port and ignore the original URL of the request. Why it is good? Sometimes I usually use it when I test something which is not proxy aware, usually rich clients. So you cannot really set up to use a proxy. Then you have to trick the rich client to send the data through the Burp proxy. Sometimes you can use the proxy settings of the operating system, but sometimes you cannot. So when you cannot, you can do tricks like changing the host file in your operating system to resolve the host name to localhost. So the host name where your application running, you resolve it to the localhost IP. And then when the browser tries to load the service, it resolves the host name and gets the IP of the localhost, then sends all the requests to the localhost where Burp is going to listen. And then in Burp, you can say here the IP where the service actually is and the port where it listens. So when Burp receives the traffic from the client on localhost, Burp can redirect it to the service, and the client will not really see that. If you have some problem with that, you can always use this support invisible proxying. It's exactly for that. When the client doesn't know anything about proxying, then you can say that, and then Burp will not use the same proxy technology as normally. So it won't use the connect request, but it's just gonna forward the request to the server. There's the certificate part. Now I already mentioned earlier that Burp works pretty well with SSL websites, but of course there are difficulties here. First of all, let me draw it for you. You're gonna love my drawings. Here we have one box. It's our browser. And we have here another box that's called Burp. And a third box, and that's the server. Now, usually when you want to do SSL, then what you need to do, it's general when you proxy SSL, you need to build two SSL tunnels. So it's SSL1 and SSL2, because that's the only way Burp will see the traffic going in the SSL tunnel. Because if you don't do that, then Burp is only going to see encrypted traffic. Now, for Burp to be able to build these two tunnels, it has to use some kind of certificate here. So here is a certificate, but but it cannot use the certificate from the server. So when it builds this tunnel, the server is going to send a certificate to Burp, but Burp cannot use that, cannot forward it to the client, because he doesn't have the private key for that certificate. So he wouldn't be able to decrypt the traffic coming from the client. So Burp has to generate his own certificate and send that certificate to the client. And in that case, when the client sends data, Burp will be able to decrypt that with his own private key to this certificate, and then he can communicate with the server again with his own private key and the certificate of the server. That works pretty fine. And here, these are the settings to tell Burp how to set up this certificate. First, you can use a simple self-signed certificate. There's no magic there. Burp will just generate a self-signed certificate. Then you can generate a certificate using the hostname received from the server, or the common name received from the server, and then signing it with the certificate authority of Burp. So Burp has a certificate and a private key for that, and he's going to sign that with this certificate authority. This is usually the best way to work with. The third option is when you're testing a reach client, and the reach client does some tests on the certificate, and it has to have some specific hostname or something. Then you can set it up here. It's going to be still signed with Burp certificate, but you can define the hostname. And you can also use a custom certificate. So sometimes when it's a real penetration test, it doesn't work in another way. You can request the test certificate from the customer and use it here so that the SSL traffic works through Burp. Now, I want to show you what this exactly means, this generated certificate. So I'm gonna go to a page which have SSL, like Gmail. Yeah, you see, I immediately got this picture which says that something is wrong. Sometimes you can just accept this. In this case, you cannot. What we can do now, so the problem is that Burp sends his own certificate to the browser because he tries to encrypt the SSL traffic to Gmail. But the browser doesn't know this certificate. It's an untrusted thing. That's why you have to tell the browser to trust this certificate. For that, you need to import the certificate of Burp. So we can just come here to Burp, and that's gonna just talk with the proxy. And there's this CA certificate menu item, and then you click on that, and you can download it. And then come to Preferences, Advanced Certificates, and then say View Certificates. And in the authorities, you say import, and then import the certificate what you got from Burp. And yeah, let's trust it for everything. And then say okay, and close. Now let's try to reload the gmail.com. Oh yeah, it was intercepted by the intercepting proxy. And now it's loaded, but let's check out the certificate. So you see that now it worked out. So it says connection is secure, but here you immediately see that verified by port trigger. And if you go to more information, view certificate, you can see that the common name is what comes from Gmail, but everything else is Portswigger. Portswigger is the company developing Burp. So what happened is that Burp got this certificate from the Gmail server, which had the common name accounts.google.com, and then he took that certificate, generated a new one, and signed it with his own certificate authority, the one which we just imported in the browser. And that's why we don't get any more error messages when we try to load the page because burp certificate is already trusted. And now here you can see that although it was SSL, you can see the response and the request because as I showed you on the picture, burp was able to create the two SSL tunnels, and this way can see the contents of the tunnels. Okay, let's go back to the options. Intercepting client requests. Here you can fine-tune if which request should be intercepted when you turn the interception on. The point here is that even when the intercept is on, it's not necessary to intercept every request. Like you can see here that it's not necessary to intercept things like JPEGs or stuff like that. So you can fine-tune your interception here. Usually you don't need to change that, even if you have some special requirements in the test, and you might add something here, but usually I don't do that. There's another part, intercepting server responses. That's something more useful. It's the same as intercepting the request. You can fine-tune which server responses should be intercepted. As you could see now, at the moment, let's try that again. So I turn intercept on and I say again test. Then the request was intercepted and I forward it, but the response is not intercepted. So why is that? You can also see that like lots of JavaScript were not intercepted because it's not necessary. But what usually annoys me that I intercept the request, but the response is not intercepted. Although I would like to see what was the response for that request, what I intercepted. But you can easily do that here. It says you need to turn on intercept responses based on the following rules. And then you say that, yes, here, or request was intercepted. That means that if the request was intercepted here, then the response is going to be intercepted as well. So if we send this request again and say login and come back here, then I click on forward, and then we see the response to that request because we said that we want to see every response where the request was also intercepted. Okay, let's continue. Now you can see do lots of things here, which I will not go in details. Like you can modify responses or modify requests. Like if you want to change the same thing in every request which goes through, then you can set up a match and replace, and then when the request goes through the proxy, even if it's not intercepted, then burp can automatically change some parts of the request for you. It could be useful, but it's not something what I use all the time. The rest is also not that interesting. SSL pass-through is if you want to say that you want to just let some SSL connections through without looking at it, then burp will let those connections through and do nothing with that. The miscellaneous part is pretty straightforward, so I'm not gonna go into that. Yeah, more or less that's the proxy tool. Just to recap, in the history you see all the requests, what you've seen. You will come back a lot here to see what went on, to look at requests and responses. And you can use the intercepting part to stop requests before going to the server, and then stop the responses before going back to the client, and so modify them on the fly or just look at them. It's pretty useful. And in the options part, you can fine-tune lots of things, like fine-tune your proxy, the interception rules, or modify requests and responses on the fly. All right, that was a proxy module. So now you can try it out yourself, play a little bit with it, and when you're ready, then continue with the next module. Thanks. Bye.